Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sunny's Book Club for, I always forget the months. I don't know. Was this for August? Sure. Yeah, we're in August, right? So it was for August. Or was it July? I don't know. We read The Coin by Yasmin Zaher. And as always, I'm going to start reading the cover blurb to situate us a little bit. The Coin's narrator is a wealthy Palestinian woman with impeccable style and meticulous hygiene, and yet the ideal self, the ideal life, remains just out of reach. Her inheritance is inaccessible, her homeland exists only in her memory, and her attempt to thrive in America seems doomed from the start. In New York, she strives to put down roots. She teaches at a school for underprivileged boys where her eccentric methods cross boundaries. She befriends a homeless swindler, and the two participate in an intercontinental scheme reselling Birkin bags. But America is stifling her willfulness, her sexuality, her principles. In an attempt to regain control, she becomes preoccupied with purity, cleanliness, and self-image, all while drawing her students into her obsessions. In an unforgettable denouement, her childhood memories converge with her material and existential statelessness, and the narrator unravels spectacularly. In enthralling sensory prose, The Coin explores nature and civilization, beauty and justice, class and belonging, all while resisting easy moralizing. Provocative, wry, and inviting, The Coin marks the arrival of a major new literary voice. God, I hate book jacket copy. The more you read them, it's just like really bad over and over again. But we're not going to critique the marketing of this book, which I do have some critiques about. But I'm wondering how we got on with The Coin. Does anyone want to kick us off and share about their experience reading this book and how you got on with it?
Sure, I'll go. I enjoyed this a lot. I agree with you, CJ, that it was marketed not great because I went in expecting something completely different, and instead I got like another like a woman versus the void type of thing, and I was like, oh, that's not what I was expecting, but I didn't hate it. Like I actually really enjoyed it, and in some parts I was like, what did she just say? Like what did she just do? Which I'm sure many of these tabs, that's what these mean. Uh, but yeah, overall, I really enjoyed it. I read it really quickly. I read it like in a day and a half, like very, very fast. Um, yeah. Okay. Those are my initial thoughts.
Love it.
I enjoyed it too. I think this is usually how it goes for me at the beginning of a book. I struggle to wrap my head around what's going on, what the point is. First half, I was trying to really grasp what the message was and why. And then it clicked and I just loved it and thought it was so funny. I got emotional, kind of putting myself in her shoes. And yeah, I'm loving this trend of these unhinged narrators kind of losing themselves a little bit and then coming back to it.
Catherine, Kate?
Yeah, I really loved it. I feel like you gave the warning the last book club. You're like, oh, it's not really about the Birkin bags. So I kind of pivoted from that thought of like, oh, it's gonna be sort of like not heistish, but like a little heistish to like, oh, it's gonna be about something else. And I feel like going into it knowing that was a good way to go into it. Um, and I just really loved it. Um, I think, and from reading I read the Vogue thing, there was like or maybe it was the article you shared, a little bit of an Otessa Moshfegh vibe. But then I weirdly kind of got a little bit of a Truman Capote vibe, which,
Love
like, yeah, I don't know what it was, but it really kind of reminded me of his Christmas Story, which is like a kind of a novella. I don't know if anybody's ever read that, but I
it.
recently read it, well, at Christmas time, and I had never read it before. My mother-in-law was like, you have to read this. And it's just sort of an interesting meditation on grief too, and that's what it reminded me of. So I loved it. And also the cover is so gorgeous. Probably one of my favorite covers, maybe ever. I don't know.
Yeah. What about you, Kate?
I mean, I felt similarly to everyone else. I just really appreciated a lot of the different like micro stories and connections that were explored within the book. I think it was really like fascinating to kind of watch her engage across like all sorts of socioeconomic backgrounds and just like contend with people's like self-perception versus, you know, how other people see them. So I think those were really cool, like mechanisms to sort of tie back to her feelings in the world as a Palestinian woman. So yeah, I loved it. I read it really fast too. So actually, I think I read it like the day after it came. So it's been a while since I picked it up, but I did really love it, and I would read it again too to see if I glean new things a second go around.
Love it. Yeah, agree. I liked it more than I thought I would, because initially I thought it was something different, and I think it brought a lot of nuance to like the current trend, I guess, of like identity politic books, and just like another great reminder that like identity isn't a monolith. And you know, I think a lot of I've read interviews with her too, and she's like, you know, I'm profiting from this weird time where my book is getting attention because I'm Palestinian, and like I don't consider this like a Palestine book, you know what I mean? Like this is more of a New York book. But her like reckoning with her not really having that same like diaspora nostalgia that some of her peers do, because she was raised in Jerusalem and like just recently moved away. I just think it's a good fresh perspective, like from a Palestinian voice that isn't so seeped in, I guess, like a Western or American understanding of like what it means to tell a Palestinian story and what that identity like means to a writer like her. And I just love that. I loved like getting my assumptions handed to me and just like kind of slapped around a little bit, but in like a fun way, not like a teachy way. I also want to just say like the physical copy, the coin in the bottom, isn't that so fun? Like more stuff like that, please, publishers. There's only so much you can do with like a book's form, but I think that was like so cheeky and just playful and like weird, and I really appreciated that. And the publisher, I got this as PR, and the publisher sent this authenticity card with it, which I thought was so fun. It says, we certify the authenticity of this product and ensure that it has been assessed under the most precise quality control. So just so cheeky. And it came in the dust bag that was like stamped with the coin. And I just thought that was so smart and like moving on so many different levels as far as like book marketing that I've seen recently. So I don't know, wanted to share that with you guys because it was fun. So I guess I want to talk about the titular coin, right? So obviously our protagonist, a big part of this plot is that she feels the embodiment of a shekel that she swallowed in her childhood. And the shekel that she swallowed, I think, happened during a car ride, which we find out ended up killing her parents and leaving her an orphan. So that is obviously hugely traumatic, and I think some would say the coin is like a manifestation of trauma, but I'm curious of how that worked for you guys, that kind of almost magical realism spin and like bodily it was almost like body horror at points when she was like describing the physicality of the coin like moving through her and stuff. And I don't know, I'd like us to talk about that a little bit, and what we thought of the coin and what its use was in the book and what we think it could stand for.
I don't know if I fully formed my full thoughts around it, but there was obviously there were a lot of themes around identity in this book. And I really saw this main character as someone who was grappling with that, obviously. And I think a lot of what we saw, like her identity played into, I don't know, we were seeing in the beginning of the story, maybe this character trying to embrace an identity as an American or someone who buys into capitalism and consumerism. And so that's where I saw the connection with the coin. And then I was, I don't even know if this might be like a dumb revelation, but I was like thinking of someone who really is struggling with their identity or feeling lost or needing some purpose can really latch onto things that like temporarily give them something, some distraction or some belief, or people who are struggling with their identity can even join cults like to find some belonging. And I was like, is capitalism a cult? Is this what's going on here? So I don't know, that's kind of where my thoughts were going, but I don't have a full like thesis on this, so I'm curious what other people thought.
I feel like this was like a better interpretation of like grief for me compared to Brat. I know some
Mhm.
people really felt like it was a good interpretation, but this to me, I felt like I identified with more. And with the coin, I was like, oh, it's so interesting because we talk about like loss of innocence and loss. And for her, it was like holding something.
Mm.
And that was that coin. And it was like she was feeling it move at certain points. And I was like, that to me is like such a good sort of metaphor. And I think honestly, like obviously we hold stuff in our bodies. I don't have to say body keeps the score, but body keeps the score. Um, and then I think about people that I'm close to and relatives that have grief and like sort of trauma. And very much it comes out in the way of like shopping and looking for something and perfectly curating and like perfect order and appearance. And like to me, I was like, oh, this is perfect for me. I don't know.
Yeah, control was a huge theme here too. So yeah, what you're saying about appearance and shopping and all that makes sense.
Yeah, before we move on to like wealth signifiers, I guess, in this book, I was listening to an interview before we jumped on with the author, and she said that one reader found an interpretation of the shekel being Israel, like the shekel was Israel because Palestine doesn't have its own currency. So like it was swallowed and embodied and like following her even from that kind of guttural way in her body, and I really liked that interpretation. So I just wanted to share that. Um but yeah, obviously this book is really fun if you like fashion houses and you like to identify luxury goods and kind of the status of what is chic at the current moment. And I think this is kind of chicness in a time and place and for a certain kind of person. It's set in 2016, like right or during the Trump administration. And it's funny to see like what is already kind of like dated in my mind and like the fashion zeitgeist, but also what is always like gonna be, I don't know, eternal, like eternally related to chicness, like a Birkin or something. So yeah, obviously she is obsessed with wealth, right? Like completely consumed by it. I think her status and her access to wealth kind of like changes too, and is a little bit mysterious to me. We know she inherited like a huge amount of money from her parents dying, but doesn't seem to have access to it all the time and is kind of reliant on like this mystery brother figure who we aren't in touch with. And she can have greater access to different kinds of wealth through these people that are floating in and out of the book, including her boyfriend, Sasha, and then Trenchcoat, right? That's his name. Yeah, Trenchcoat. And yeah, I just wanted to hear your guys' reading experience of how that all landed with you. Like, did you think that was fun? And I don't know, how else can you see wealth and the idea of like status and consumerism playing out in this book and the kind of shenanigans she goes on?
I don't know anything about that world. Like, I love looking at like really nice clothes and things like that, but I have no knowledge on like how much those things cost or like the value of them over time. And I meant to look it up, but is the way they were buying Birkins like actually what like the way it happens?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me because I'm
Yeah.
like, what do you mean they say no to people? I'm like, what if you just have the money and they're like, no, we're not selling it to you, even though you have that money, you don't fit the bill. Like you don't fit the look, you don't fit the vibe. Like, sorry. That's crazy to me. And I'm like, what do you mean? So that was shocking to me. So thank you for, clarifying that that's actually what happens and that's not something she made up just for the book. So that's gives me more to think about actually. So
I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways that portion of the story was created to talk about what it feels like or means if you're able to reach that point in society as somebody who's come from somewhere else. I think it's like a big, especially juxtaposed against like the end of the book where she's getting dirty or talking about her grandma's house and cleaning and like how it's beautiful, but it's outside and, it can get dusty. And I think that this is just like her exploring, can I like blend into this world? Am I able to like not necessarily cosplay because I don't think that's like fair to her, but really it's like a way of checking your assimilation level in like a certain aspect of society. So like her boy toy, whatever Sasha is like super wealthy. So there's that aspect, and he considers her wealthy, but you can tell just based on her behavior that there's always some part of her that doesn't really feel that or believe it. And so it's just really interesting to kind of see how that came into play because it is this crazy like elitist world. Like I live by a fancy mall that's like well known, not super close, but there are like giant lines to go into like Louis Vuitton or something and buy one thing. And they may or may not let you buy it. Like they only sell to certain people. It's super crazy, but it's like this club. And I feel like a lot of her experiences in here are about that, but she always kind of returns to like a certain, I don't want to say dirtiness because I don't want to do trench coat dirty like that, but she's like still fascinated by that. And that's why I find it so like funny and kind of ironic that that's who she goes and does this like, weird switcheroo kind of situation with. But I feel like it's a way of her being subversive.
Mhm.
And tell throughout the book that she enjoys being subversive when she's given like the right scenario to play that out in, whether as a teacher or at a benefit. And so I kind of feel like that was a great way of like alluding to her subversion as a whole and kind of her desire to like act out. So that's how I took that, but maybe that's not it.
Yeah, it just showed like to the limits of wealth and what that can have you access if you're still not white in America and in most of the world. Like her reckoning with the limitations of like what her skin could get her throughout this book and like her different meditations on, I guess, even like racial hierarchy like in Palestine and in America, like, light in the winter, dark in the summer, and that kind of critique of the older generation, like wanting you to be as fair as possible, and like her not ever being as aware of her skin color than being in America was all wrapped up in access to me and like her wealth access actually having limitations, even though she was like filthy rich and surrounded by people who were filthy rich.
Yeah, like what you guys have mentioned, the contrast between the beginning of the book to the end, these two sort of different lives she's living. I thought it was so effective how you see all these rules to get into this world, all this judgment, and these steps you have to take, and these challenges that, aren't necessary, but that like people wait in line or talk to the right people or know someone. And then you compare that with, just nature where there isn't really judgment or morals. Like if you're like a bird or something, like you're not doing things because of society. Like, and so to have that contrast was, yeah, really effective, like I said.
I want to talk about her role as a teacher and kind of this absurd. I thought this part of the book was really fun. I loved her interaction with the boys. I loved this like idea that this pro bono like elite boarding school for underprivileged boys like exists. Like maybe it does, but it almost seems like so American and absurdist that like that would be a situation that she would find herself in, is like this elite grooming school for like young proper gentlemen, but it's only served to like lower socioeconomic kids, is just a perfect kind of like situation for her to find herself in. Yeah, so how did you guys find like her as a teacher, these kind of bizarre sentiments that she's trying to press on to these young boys, and kind of like the organizing that happens between the groups of boys themselves? Jess is stressed.
I know I am very stressed because I work in public education. I was a teacher. I was an English teacher, and now I'm a librarian at the public high school. So her interactions and her methods in the classroom, I was like, that would not fly. That absolutely not. But it was entertaining because, I mean, you can tell that she was very dedicated and passionate, but in her own way. She just didn't want to like, I honestly don't know how to take it other than the fact that like I live it every day. And if I were to do that, I'd be fired like the next day. It's just not, and so I think, I don't know, that part kind of took me out of it, and not in a bad way, but in like a, okay, like let me ground this into like the world that she's living in. You know, how did what was the principal's name, or like the headmaster's name? Aisha?
Mhm.
Or Aisha, right? I'm like, how do you not, like, how is nobody doing like evaluations? I'm like, nobody's going into her room. Like, um, yeah, I don't think I'm the best person to talk about it because I'm mostly just looking at it as like a, yeah, that's not real. That
Yeah.
wouldn't be okay. Um, but I think she kind of felt sorry for the kids in a way, and not and in that regard, not in a good way. So like, you know, treating them, pitying them basically. And I think that's how I took her interactions with them. And that approach with kids, you know, isn't the best because, you know, you don't want to assume that they're good because they come from a good family, and you don't want to assume that they're bad because they come from a bad family, or vice versa, or any like mixed way. And I personally think she did very much put them in a box. And so I don't know, that was interesting to me because she did teach all brown kids, and you know, being a brown woman herself, she kind of put them in a box that she herself didn't want to be in. So yeah. Okay. And rent.
I feel like when I was going over the different scenarios that went on with teaching, I'm like, some of these are great ideas, and that's why I'm not a teacher, is I would get fired immediately.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Take the kids to go see like some poetry, go to a protest, whatever. Like,
Yeah, I really liked her. I guess like how I would synthesize it is like she's so disillusioned, right? Like she really was fed, like a lot of people are, this idea of America and what it feels like to exist here and what New York City is. And then she's greeted with, you know, the absolute abject poverty and mental illness and, you know, dirt and grime, and just completely shattered her idea and expectations of everything that she thought was to come and associated with America. And I think like she uses teaching and her access to youth, I guess, and this group of students to like teach about unionization and like freedom from authority um in a way that, I don't know, it like probably speaks to like a seed of her own childhood of like that can only be fostered when you're young, but also is just like, you know, she knows that I think youth movements and kind of those organizing principles go hand in hand in a way, and she's like trying to pass that on to them in a way that like she's like, this is actually what's going to be useful from your prep school learning, is for me to teach you guys how to organize amongst yourself and like speak about what you actually want to change. And I thought that that was awesome, and also why I couldn't be a teacher, because it's like, fuck yeah, that is like a course that they should be learning, especially as lower socioeconomic, you know, BIPOC kids. Like that is what they need. That's the skill. rather than whatever the fuck people are teaching fourth graders right now. So yeah,
I
that
would
was
like
my
to point
understanding.
out that they revolted and ended up using the money not for the purposes that she wanted them
Totally.
to. So I'm just like, yes, like this
Kids are still
all
gonna
this
be
stuff,
kids.
absolutely, like teach them, all that stuff, but you got to reel it in, because if not, when you give them that freedom, like the freedom she wanted, right? She wanted that freedom to like explore who she was, and with her money, she wanted to be independent that way, and she gave it to a bunch of 13 and 14-year-olds, expecting them to rise to the occasion. And it's like, you got to give them a little more instruction than that. And so I think that's why I was stressed out, because I'm like, what is she doing? Like at first it seemed like it was working, and then it just like completely backfired, and I thought that was funny.
What about trench coat, right? So to remind us all, we meet trench coat because she abandons a trench coat in the park because it's too soiled for her to wear, I think. And he picks it up. She notices it is him on the street and he's wearing it. It's her trench coat. And she's drawn to him and like needs to have some kind of connection towards him. And he's kind of the catalyst for getting her into the Birkin scheme. I think you could argue that she doesn't need to be associated with trench coat. You know what I mean? Like he's obviously like a con man and a schemer. And, going back to that comment on her liking transgressive things, like I think that is a lot of the appeal there, is that he's having to hustle and like work for and manifest his like status aspirations. But how did you guys feel about Trenchcoat and their kind of like weird neutered relationship at times? And, this man completely moving into her apartment and kind of whirlwinding her like into this madcap scheme. How did that work for you?
I viewed it sort of as like I was juxtaposing Trenchcoat and Sasha a lot, because I was viewing it as she was never really comfortable with Sasha because she didn't think he could be like in the mud. I think there was always a part of her that's kind of like, this guy is so idealistic. He thinks of the world this way. Whereas I feel like Trenchcoat, she saw in him maybe something that she identifies with herself. And so I think that that was a lot of the appeal. Like, here's this person that super like presents themselves a specific way, like engages with the world in a specific way, kind of just believes that like things are theirs for the taking, but maybe hasn't resolved, some sort of like other issues that they have. So I feel like she felt more comfortable with him, which is very ironic because for me, I'm not going to be as comfortable like with a con man that wants me to go and do like weird Birkin purchasing and reselling. But I think that's how I perceived him. I feel like she was working out something with herself and with her emotions and her sense of worth, and that he was like a better space to do that with in terms of like processing with another human being. Where Sasha really couldn't be that for her. I never got the impression she like felt that way about him, despite kind of opportunities like at that benefit, like dinner or whatever. It's like, I think he would have wanted to be that for her, but she would not allow it. So I thought that was interesting. I really feel like he was like a metaphor of her own self exploration, and like kind of allowed you to see it play out in a more like crazy way, like unexpected way. But I know that's what I took away from that whole dynamic.
And my thoughts expand on this a little bit because I was really struck by the conversations around like how we are maybe shaped by our surroundings, or how the narrator kept bringing up the people that she sees in the street, or like the people that she's out and about with at the same time, and how they might be similar types of people, or saying that how Aisha is a kind person, I think is how she described her, and how you don't see those types of people in the street often. So I think it was kind of just this phase in her life where she was surrounded by these types of people, and yeah, learning about herself in that lens, and seeing if that was something that she enjoyed, or like how she wanted to live her life. But yeah, it seemed like another transactional relationship.
Well, it's interesting too, because I think she respects him because she like equates wealth and like status with goodness. So she's like, oh, he's seeking this out, and really he's like obviously probably a criminal. But it's interesting too because I think you see that play out in the classroom too, where she's like, oh, like this kid is writing kind of exactly what I want to hear. Was it Jay? I forget what his name was, which one of the kids it was. And she was like, he's my favorite. And then he's like, actually the little shit. But I think as much as she gets annoyed with people making assumptions about her, obviously, like the rest of us, she's making assumptions about everyone.
Mhm.
And that's sort of interesting to have multiple different foils happening.
Yeah, in the interviews I was listening to, there was something that either the interviewer or the author said about the narrator having this really, like, she's herself no matter what, for better or for worse, and what she was attracted to in Trenchcoat was his ability to chameleon and like shapeshift and be able to like adapt to different situations depending on the needs. And she felt like a huge inability to do that and to, I guess, assimilate, really, right? Like that's really the word there, is what she was struggling with, not only in like America, but all of these micro social situations that she found herself in. She didn't know how to like relate to another person and kind of posture in a different way. And that's what she really, I think, admired and like saw in Trenchcoat, and then probably also in some of these other student relationships as well. Like Jay, I think that's, he was telling her what she wanted to hear, and like maybe that's what she liked about him. It wasn't really anything innate or like inherent to him as a person or a child, I guess.
Well, and when she did try and relate to other people, it was through her sexuality, which she even like admits. And
Yep.
she kept trying to push that with Trenchcoat, and Trenchcoat's like, I'm gay. No.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought they're like it's really like, this is such an easy comparison, I just don't even want to almost say it, but it is like Moshfeghian, this narrator's relationship to sex. It really reminds me of My Year of Rest and Relaxation and Eileen, just kind of the obtuseness of like sex as a idea in this book, and like the limits of it being able to actually have you relate to someone either. Like it just fails. Like there's not enough there for it to actually work. And I like that that was shown to us, I guess, through Trenchcoat, but also through her like, wait, did she have sex with a woman in this book?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of
What
the
happened?
Palestinian gals she met.
Yeah. What happened there?
She she asked her to go to dinner, and then after dinner she was like, okay, like let's get an apartment, like let's go to one of our apartments or a hotel. So they go back to her hotel, and as soon as the woman is like kind of pillow talking after the sexual act, she's like, I'm not into this. It was like any form of emotional intimacy. But then it's interesting because like we do see that change sort of after her forest room or whatever, because then she's masturbating or whatever, and she feels comfortable like sort of approaching her own self, and she even like kind of talks to herself at that point, and that's where the book leaves us. But
I think there's some interesting stuff in this last chapter. It's so, not chapter, this last section of the book where she's making her weird apartment den and kind of, getting into the mud of it all. And I think this happens post that weekend away with Sasha, right? Like that's kind of what spurred her kind of going feral. Like she had that desire for wildness, nature at large, and then recreated it again, like, which is funny, like in the rigidity of a house. Like that's so controlling of her to try to like recreate a natural environment indoors. Just really funny and like true to who she is. But I think there's some really fun stuff too about like how she's addressing the reader that's in this last section. Like she even starts saying like you, and like I think it like kind of devolves into surreality at the end, where it's like I said to you, like the narration throughout the book and it ending in this kind of like address to the reader really worked for me. I thought it was really fun and charged. Yeah, did you guys like that? How did you get along with this last section of chaos? I guess I saw it coming, but also was like gratified by it at the same time. I'm like glad it happened.
I'll go. I thought that part was interesting because, I mean, again, she goes the whole book trying to be clean. Being clean, linking it with morality is like her whole shtick. And then once she finishes that trip with Sasha, she's like, I need to reground myself. Like I need to reorient myself, but I'm not going to do it out there where it's actually scary. I'm going to do it in here where I can control it. Basically, what you guys were saying just about the whole control thing is that she wants to be able to control her environment, but also feel free to, I don't know, shed her skin kind of quite literally because of how intensely she scrubs herself. And then only to cover herself up with dirt again is kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to say full circle moment, but something along those lines. And then, because shortly after that, then the school burns down, and then, like burning something is also like a form of cleansing. So, like, that could mean something. Yeah, I thought it happened really fast. Like I kind of wished it was like a little more fleshed out and like a little more concrete in how it, ends. But I thought that part was interesting for sure. With, coming back to like these themes of cleansing with like the fire happening at the school and then her, cleansing with the dirt. It's like kind of redundant, but at the same time it makes sense. So yeah.
I just thought it was funny how we have another deer, we have another room that a woman's built. Like, I'm like, I need a museum with all these rooms that these women that are just down bad have built. Yeah, no, I thought it was her confronting herself and finally like kind of being able to come to terms with herself. Which I think is part of grief and like part of growing up even. Because it did feel like a little bit of a coming of age story in a way too. But so good.
Yeah, I'm looking at, I guess, the last page, and the last paragraph says, "You'll come with me everywhere I go, I said to you. We have no choice." And then I heard a bird chirping outside, and I understood that it was your voice, and this is how we began to speak. I wonder if she's talking to her grandmother or like lineage, this idea of lineage and like family that she's so disconnected to, but obviously is inside of her all the time through the coin as well. Or do you think she's talking to the coin? I don't know. What do you guys think of that last passage and this kind of addressing of the you?
In the article that you sent, it suggested that the I and the you that she's referring to is herself, just like an
Ooh.
out of body experience that she was referring to. Like she's like meeting herself basically.
Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
I like that more. Okay. Amazing. Well, it's kind of like a taut little novel that also is doing so much. So I don't know if I have any other structured questions, but is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you guys think would be fun to discuss as a group, or anything we didn't cover?
Just my thoughts about the end. I really liked that as she was embracing herself more and getting in touch with herself, like we saw more childhood memories. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's like embodied for the first time. She can like
Mhm.
access some part of herself because she's like with herself
Yeah.
for the first time instead of like always thinking about projecting. Like, what is she projecting, and like how can she position herself to be able to like navigate whatever's in front of her? There was like no one to witness her in her
Hmm.
apartment when she was rotting, so she was just looking inward, I guess. Love it. Loves it. Cool. We're reading My Friends for September. There's still time to sign up if you are watching this and you're not on this call. Booker nominated. I've heard raves. I've heard you cry, so I'm excited to cry. And then next month we're gonna read the new Sally Rooney, as is God-given right.
I was wondering about that.
I needed an excuse to get it, so this is the best news.
I know. I'm still mad at FSG for not sending me a copy, but I'll try to forgive them. Do they know who Sunny's book club is? Obviously they don't. They don't even care. All right. Thanks guys. Great discussion as always. See you on the flip flop.
Bye.
Bye.